Chapter 1: The Supreme Controller and the Illusion of Equality. I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, and he instructed it to Manu, the father of humanity, and Manu in turn instructed it to his son. Bhagavad Gita 4:1. My journey into Paradise Lost often felt like attempting a complex yoga pose without proper guidance, perhaps something like the challenging scorpion pose where balance and focus are everything. I could perceive the intricate movements of Milton's verse, the powerful expressions of cosmic drama, and the sheer epic scale that spans heaven, hell, and earth. Yet the fundamental philosophy, the profound why behind the rebellion, the fall, and the divine order, sometimes eluded me, leaving me tangled in confusion. It was during our initial family discussions about the book's overarching purpose that my attention was irresistibly drawn to the very genesis of Milton's narrative, the dramatic opening scenes of rebellion in heaven. This was no mere literary tale. It was a cosmic battle of wills, an ultimate clash between unquestionable authority and defiant ambition, resonating deeply with the foundational principles of ancient wisdom traditions. My father, with his profound grasp of the Bhagavad Gita and years of spiritual study, became my indispensable guide. Through patient conversations over tea in our quiet home, he helped me discern the universal spiritual truths woven into Milton's majestic verse, bridging the gap between 17th-century English poetry and timeless Eastern philosophy. This chapter will establish the absolute authority and supremacy of God, as depicted in both Milton's epic and the Gita. We'll contrast this divine order with Satan's audacious rebellion and his deeply flawed desire for false equality, a theme that echoes in today's world, where ideas of personal empowerment and equality often blur the lines between healthy ambition and destructive ego. Integral to this understanding is the concept of disciplic succession, which the Gita presents as the authorized means of receiving and comprehending transcendental knowledge. This framework provides an illuminating lens through which to grasp the profound distinction between genuine spiritual freedom, rooted in harmonizing with the divine will, and the perilous illusion of independent sovereignty that ensnared Satan and continues to entangle conditioned souls in cycles of suffering and rebirth. Milton's invocation and Satan's audacious defiance. Milton wastes no time plunging the reader into the heart of his epic. Following his invocation to the Muse, where he seeks inspiration to assert eternal providence, and justify the ways of God to men, he immediately introduces the boundless expanse of God's domain and his eternal providence. Yet almost instantaneously our attention is seized by the magnificent yet terrifying figure of Satan. Once clothed with transcendent brightness in the happy realms of light, he is now utterly fallen, rallying his bewildered and defeated legions within the fiery confines of hell, a place of darkness visible and eternal torment. What immediately strikes the reader is Satan's unyielding pride, a quality that makes him both captivating and cautionary. Despite his catastrophic defeat and banishment from heaven's glory, his spirit remains unbroken, consumed by a defiant resolve that borders on heroic tragedy. He declares with arresting conviction, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." This singular line speaks volumes to a deep-seated, albeit often misguided, human desire for independence and absolute sovereignty, even if such a pursuit leads to a desolate and self-imposed kingdom, much like modern figures who chase power at the expense of harmony, whether in politics, business, or personal relationships. Satan's bold discourse to his assembled, confused legions in hell vividly portrays a fundamental challenge to the established celestial hierarchy. He views God's rule not as a benevolent order designed for the greater good, but as an oppressive monarchy over beings who are, by their very nature, his equals, if in power and splendor less, in freedom equal. He insinuates that God reigns merely by old repute, consent or custom, and his regal state put forth at full, but still his strength concealed. This rhetoric cleverly twists the narrative, suggesting that divine authority was unchallenged only because it was untested, much like how in today's society long-standing institutions are questioned in the name of progress or equality. This is a profound misrepresentation, implying that God's authority is not inherent or absolute, but rather a product of tradition or an unspoken agreement, whose true power remained hidden until overtly challenged. Satan vehemently refuses to submit necks and choose to bend the supple knee, portraying his rebellion not as an act of malevolence but as a righteous struggle for what he perceives as inherent freedom and equality. He rallies his troops with assurances that their strength is equal, contending that their expulsion from heaven was a consequence of brute force, not a just divine law rooted in cosmic order. This bold discourse further reveals Satan's profound self-delusion, a trap that many fall into when ego overrides wisdom. He is convinced that he and his cohorts can reascend, self-raised, and repossess their native seat. His aspiration transcends mere liberty, reaching for honor, dominion, glory, and renown. Even in the abysmal depths of hell, his height of mind persists, nourishing the conviction that he remains supreme, albeit only supreme in misery. Such joy ambition finds. It's a poignant reminder of how unchecked ambition can lead to self-inflicted isolation, similar to entrepreneurs or leaders who build empires only to find themselves alone in their hells of burnout and regret. I remember the bewilderment I felt discussing these passages with my father during one of our evening walks. "Dad," I asked, "how can a being as powerful and intelligent as Satan make such a fundamental error?" His arguments for freedom and equality resonate with so many human values. Think of civil rights movements or the push for gender equality today. My father, listening patiently as we strolled under the stars, would simply smile. He recognized that my questions touched upon the very core of spiritual understanding. To truly appreciate Milton's narrative, he would begin, we must first establish unequivocally the nature of ultimate authority. Our tradition, particularly the Gita, leaves no room for ambiguity on this fundamental point. Let's sit down with the text and see. The absolute authority of the Supreme Divine. My father opened his well-worn copy of the Gita, a book marked with notes from decades of reflection, and directed my attention to the chapter's guiding verse. I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, and he instructed it to Manu, the father of humanity, and Manu in turn instructed it to his son. This verse, my father explained, is far more than a mere historical account. It is a profound declaration regarding the origin of all authority and knowledge. It sets the foundational stage for understanding the true identity of the divine, and by extension, the absolute nature of God. In the Gita, the Supreme is unequivocally declared as the ultimate divine personality, not some abstract force but a personal being with whom we can have a relationship. The divine as inherently complete. The Supreme's designation, my father continued, is not a title earned through conquest or election, nor one that rests on old repute, consent, or custom as Satan audaciously claims of Milton's God. No, the divine is supreme because of inherently possessing all perfections in full, complete strength, fame, wealth, knowledge, beauty, and renunciation. These are inherent, eternal attributes, not acquired ones that can be challenged or duplicated. This understanding is critical because it differentiates the true divine from any other powerful being or deity, whether in mythology or modern interpretations. While the term supreme is sometimes mistakenly applied to any influential figure, think of historical emperors or today's tech moguls, in the context of the Gita, it explicitly designates the ultimate divine personality. This truth is confirmed by all the great spiritual masters throughout history, from ancient sages to contemporary teachers. The divine consistently establishes this supreme position in the Gita, and this is further corroborated in sacred texts throughout the world, including echoes in Abrahamic traditions like the Bible's declarations of God's sovereignty. Origin of all and supreme controller. My father emphasized, the divine is the original supreme personality, the absolute truth, the source of both the individual soul and the impersonal absolute. The Supreme is the ultimate controller and the origin of everything. There is nothing greater than or equal to the divine, no peer, no rival. To illustrate this, the Gita explains the absolute truth in 3 phases of understanding: the impersonal aspect, the localized aspect, and the personal aspect. While all 3 are identical aspects of the absolute truth, the personal feature represents the most complete and perfect knowledge, inviting a devotional relationship rather than mere intellectual grasp. The divine is not only the origin of all living entities but also the origin of all material and spiritual worlds. The text states, "I am the father of this universe, the mother, the support, and the grandsire." The Supreme is described as the great-grandfather, the creator of the cosmic creator, who is himself considered the grandfather of the universe. This lineage clearly establishes the divine as the ultimate source of all existence, a concept that parallels Milton's God as the author and end of all things. God's transcendental nature. It's like this, my father continued, seeing my contemplative look as I pondered the implications. We don't argue with the sun about its right to shine, or with gravity about its power to hold us to the earth. These are inherent laws of nature, but even these laws emanate from the Supreme. To claim freedom equal to God for a living entity is as illogical as a wave claiming equality with the ocean, or a branch asserting independence from the tree's root. The branch's very existence, its sap, its leaves, are all dependent on the root. Without the root, it withers and dies. Imagine a yogi trying to defy gravity in meditation. It's not about rebellion, but alignment. Furthermore, the divine is described as all-perfect, and crucially, there is no possibility of becoming subjected to the laws of material nature. All material activities are conducted under the three modes of material nature, modes that influence everything from our moods to our actions. Yet the Supreme is not subject to them, even though they emanate from the divine. This transcendental position means that the divine is completely free from the influence of these modes, unlike conditioned souls who are constantly bewildered by them, swinging between joy and sorrow like pendulums in a storm. The constitutional position of the living entity. The very foundation of understanding the cosmic order and our place within it lies in grasping our constitutional position relative to the Supreme, a realization that can transform daily life, from yoga practice to interpersonal relationships. Eternal fragment of the Supreme. The living entities, my father would explain during our deeper sessions, are not randomly generated beings. They are eternal fragmental parts of the Supreme. Qualitatively, we are one with the divine, possessing consciousness, eternity, and bliss, but quantitatively, we are infinitesimally small. Just as the sunshine is qualitatively similar to the sun, warm, illuminating, yet vastly smaller and dependent, so too are we minute spiritual sparks of the Supreme, deriving our essence from the source. This eternal relationship between the individual soul and the Supreme Divine is clearly articulated in sacred texts across traditions. The Supreme is accepted as the origin of all emanations, and living entities belong to the superior energy, while matter constitutes inferior energy. Although the energy and the energetic are non-different in an ultimate sense, like heat and fire, the energetic is always the supreme and the energy is subordinate. This relationship is akin to that of master and servant or teacher and taught, fostering growth rather than oppression. The illusion of independent existence. While endowed with minute independence, a gift that allows free will, the living entity often misuses this freedom. In material existence, my father explained, one is subjected to the influence of the mind and the senses. In fact, the pure soul is entangled in the material world because of the mind's ego, which desires to lord it over material nature. This domineering mentality, which compels living entities to try to lord it over material nature, is precisely what keeps them conditioned within the material realm, reincarnating through cycles of birth and death. Satan's grandiose declarations of aspiring for honor, dominion, glory, and renown, and his belief in being lord of everything, even in hell, perfectly exemplify this false ego. He embodies the conditioned soul's tragic misconception of self-sufficiency and supreme control, much like a CEO who believes their empire is eternal, only to face collapse. I recalled Abdil from Paradise Lost, the lone seraph who courageously stood against Satan's blasphemous claims amid the gathering storm of rebellion. Abdil argued that serving God is not servitude, but rather in alignment with one's natural constitutional position. Unjustly thou depravest it with the name of servitude, to serve whom God ordains, or nature. God and nature bid the same when he who rules is worthiest and excels them whom he governs. Abdil even sagaciously tells Satan, thyself not free but to thyself enthralled, highlighting the irony of rebellion leading to greater bondage. This perfectly echoed my father's explanations. Abdil, in his unwavering loyalty, was in harmony with his true identity, while Satan, striving for an illusory independence, became tragically enslaved by his own immense pride and corrosive envy. The living entity, trapped in material consciousness, appears to be its master but is neither its proprietor nor controller of its actions and reactions. This state is likened to being in the midst of the material ocean, struggling for existence, tossed by waves with no control, waves of desire, anger, and illusion. The only true solution is to get out of the water by transcendental spiritual consciousness, a process that begins with humility and devotion. The purity of knowledge. Understanding these profound truths about God's supremacy and our constitutional position is not a matter of intellectual conjecture or personal opinion. It requires access to pure, unadulterated knowledge transmitted through an authorized channel, lest we fall into the same traps as Satan. Divine teaching through disciplic succession. How does one come to understand this profound truth? My father would ask rhetorically during our talks. How do we, as finite beings with limited senses, comprehend the infinite, especially when faced with so many conflicting ideas and interpretations in books, online forums, or even spiritual retreats? He would then point again to the verse we began with. I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god, and he instructed it to Manu, the father of humanity, and Manu in turn instructed it to his son. This is where the concept of disciplic succession becomes absolutely critical, he emphasized. This verse reveals the ancient history of the Gita's teachings, tracing it from the divine to the sun god, who then instructed Manu, the father of humanity, and Manu in turn taught his son, a king of the royal order. This imperishable science was especially meant for the royal order, for saintly kings, because they were entrusted with protecting their citizens from material bondage by imparting spiritual knowledge, much like ethical leaders today who guide societies toward higher values. The Gita explicitly states, this supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it appears to be lost. My father explained that this breakage in the succession system is why the original purpose of the Gita became scattered across misinterpreted versions. This means that genuine knowledge about the supreme and our eternal relationship must be received from an authorized source, not concocted through our own mental speculation or clever arguments that prioritize ego over truth. Purpose of pure teaching. Milton's epic aims to assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to men, I recalled during one discussion, but how can one truly justify God's ways without truly knowing the divine or understanding the supreme nature? Exactly, my father affirmed. This is precisely why the purity of the message is paramount. Authentic spiritual teaching specifically emphasizes presenting divine wisdom as it is without adulteration, because many interpretations were introduced to fulfill someone's personal ambition. He warned that mundane speculators like politicians, philosophers, or scientists often have very little knowledge of divine truth and try to banish or diminish the divine when writing commentary. Such commentaries are deemed useless because they divert the reader's mind from what is clearly stated, that all devotional service should be offered to the supreme divine, not scattered among lesser goals. The spirit of the Gita, as my father always stressed, must be understood as directed by the supreme. It is not to be interpreted whimsically but accepted as it is, just as one would follow the directions on a medicine label given by a physician. Deviating could be fatal. To inject personal opinions or speculative philosophies is to distort the very essence of the divine message, leading to confusion rather than clarity. The danger of unauthorized commentary. Such unauthorized commentary, my father explained with a note of caution, leads to bewilderment. Great spiritual masters have explicitly warned us about these interpretations. Anyone who endeavors to understand the Gita from an impersonal point of view, treating the divine as a formless energy without personality, will commit a great blunder. The result of such a blunder will be that the misguided student will certainly be bewildered on the path of spiritual guidance and will not be able to go back to the spiritual realm. This warning underscores the danger of impersonalism, which denies the personal feature of the divine. The supreme is absolute, and there is no difference between the divine name, form, qualities, and activities. They are all eternal and blissful. Impersonalists, however, often try to separate the divine personality from mind or body, which is sheer ignorance. Such approaches fail to grasp that the divine form is a symbol of complete knowledge and bliss, and the supreme is the proprietor of everything, not an abstract void. Those who are envious of the divine have no authentic access to the great literature. Even highly scholarly individuals, if they are envious or prideful, produce commentaries that are useless because they criticize without truly knowing the truth, much like critics who dissect a masterpiece without appreciating its soul. The honey bottle analogy. To further illustrate the critical importance of proper understanding and devotion, my father often cited a vivid analogy from the spiritual tradition. Those who approach the teachings without being devotees, especially those envious of the divine, have no authentic access to this great literature. They are like bees licking on a bottle of honey. They cannot taste the true mysticism because they have not opened the bottle. They buzz around the surface, missing the sweetness inside. This means that external scholarship, intellectual prowess, or even a superficial engagement with the text, such as reading it for academic credit or casual interest, without the internal attitude of devotion and submission to the Supreme, will remain fruitless in unlocking the true spiritual essence. Only by approaching the teachings with the right mood, humility, sincerity, and through the right channel like a trusted guru or succession line, can one truly perceive and benefit from the divine wisdom, transforming abstract knowledge into lived experience. Satan's rebellion as a manifestation of ignorance. When viewed through the lens of the Gita's teachings on divine authority and the purity of knowledge, Satan's rebellion in Paradise Lost takes on profound spiritual significance. Ceases to be merely a narrative of a powerful angel's defiance and becomes a universal allegory for the devastating consequences of spiritual ignorance, pride, and the rejection of the divine order, a warning relevant to anyone chasing illusions of power today. Rejection of authorized knowledge. Satan's arguments for equal freedom and his reliance on his own counsels are in essence a rejection of authorized knowledge. He actively denies the intrinsic supreme authority of God, fabricating the notion that God's rule is founded on mere old repute, consent, or custom, rather than on the inherent position of the Supreme. This stands in stark contrast to the divine's undisputed and self-evident supremacy, as revealed through pure transmission. The Gita highlights that those who are ignorant and faithless persons who doubt the revealed scriptures do not attain God consciousness. They ultimately fall down because they neither believe in nor worship the Supreme Divine and consequently have no status whatsoever in spiritual emancipation. Satan in his pride exemplifies this faithlessness, refusing to accept the revealed truth of God's absolute position, much like skeptics who dismiss spiritual texts as outdated myths. The demonic spirit and false ego. Satan's character, particularly his persistence in rebellion despite utter defeat, perfectly embodies the demonic spirit described in the Gita. The demonic are characterized by their refusal to believe in the divine, instead choosing to simply enjoy the property of the Supreme without acknowledging divine proprietorship. They devise all types of interpretations according to personal whims, rather than adhering to established spiritual truths, leading to chaos. This directly parallels Satan's endless machinations in hell, where he conjures new strategies of fraud or guile after being vanquished in direct warfare. His desire to lord it over material nature and his height of mind in hell, where he believes he is supreme in misery, are classic symptoms of false ego. The Gita states that the individual soul is entangled in the material world precisely because of the mind's ego which desires to lord it over material nature. Satan's grand pronouncements of being the Lord of everything, the enjoyer, perfect, powerful, and happy, believing that there is none so powerful and happy as I am, are not expressions of actual power but profound delusions arising from this false ego, delusions that mirror narcissistic leaders or influencers who project invincibility online, only to crumble inwardly. Satan as fool number 1. The Gita leaves no doubt that one who fails to understand the true nature of the divine, despite opportunities for instruction, is considered deeply ignorant. My father often referred to such individuals as representing the height of foolishness, quoting the text, "Those who do not understand the real nature of the Supreme as the eternal, blissful, all-knowing divine personality, despite clear instructions, are certainly the most foolish." Satan, with his vast intellect and original exalted position as a high angel, had every opportunity to comprehend the divine order. Yet his overwhelming pride and envy blinded him, preventing him from accepting God's supremacy. His persistent defiance, born of this spiritual ignorance, led him to devise elaborate schemes against the divine will, ultimately leading to his eternal suffering and entanglement, a fate that serves as a cautionary tale for anyone ignoring inner wisdom in pursuit of ego-driven goals. This profound misunderstanding of his own identity as a minute-dependent fragment of the Supreme and his rejection of the proper channel of knowledge ultimately condemns Satan. His demand for equality with God is not an enlightened quest for justice, but a tragic symptom of his deep spiritual ignorance and the unbridled influence of false ego. Conclusion: the path to true freedom. This exploration of paradise lost through the philosophical framework of the Gita profoundly alters one's perception of Milton's epic. Satan's bold discourse, which might initially appear as a valiant struggle for inherent freedom, perhaps even inspiring in a world that values individualism, is now revealed as a tragic testament to the destructive power of false ego when fundamentally divorced from the absolute truth. His arguments, once seemingly compelling, are exposed as being rooted in a foundational misunderstanding of his own identity and the Supreme's unassailable authority. He utterly failed to grasp that the divine is the supreme controller, the origin of everything, and that all living entities are eternally divine parts and parcels, meant for harmonious service rather than rivalry. The Gita's emphatic stress on receiving knowledge through the unadulterated succession system powerfully highlights why Satan's self-raised philosophy inevitably led him into utter darkness. He represents those who, without perfect knowledge of the divine, try to banish or diminish divine truth through their own speculative interpretations and self-serving ambitions. Path to liberation, conversely, begins with shedding this illusory sense of independent control and accepting our true constitutional position as eternal servants of the divine, a shift that can bring peace amid chaos. This chapter fundamentally underscores that true freedom lies not in asserting an illusory independence from the divine, but in harmonizing with the divine will, accepting our inherent eternal connection to the supreme controller. This understanding provides a comprehensive and profoundly satisfying justification for the ways of God. Demonstrates unequivocally that genuine peace, lasting happiness, and ultimate fulfillment are attained not through rivalry or competition with the Supreme, but through unwavering devotion and a deep, loving understanding of our eternal relationship with the Supreme Divine. This profound understanding is the very first and most crucial step toward achieving true paradise, not merely the recovery of a lost garden, but the restoration of our authentic spiritual nature and our eternal relationship with the divine. As we'll explore in the coming chapters, this foundation sets the stage for delving into the cosmic architecture, the nature of temptation, and the path to redemption.